Hi, I'm Sally. You know, I thought turning 50 surrounded by family would feel like love. Instead, my father-in-law stood up, smiled, and played a video not to honor me, but to humiliate me. Every whisper, every lie, every cruel smile finally made sense that night. But when the screen flickered and his secret played for everyone to see, the room went silent. And that's when everything changed. It was my 46th birthday, and I felt like an uninvited guest at my own party. The air outside was crisp with that familiar fall bite, and the sky over Charleston was soft gray like it couldn't be bothered to shine for me. Claude's backyard had the usual setup: plastic folding tables, mismatched chairs, and banners that looked like they'd been used for a dozen birthdays before mine. Everything about it felt expected, like someone had thrown it together just to check off a box. Not one part of it felt meant for me. There were at least 15 people there, his siblings, cousins, neighbors. They liked more than me. I stood by the snack table, holding a paper plate with a slice of cake no one offered me, pretending to nibble. No one asked how I was doing. Not one, "Happy birthday, Sally." That didn't sound like it came from muscle memory. No mention of the pain in my knees or the small freelance contract I'd just landed. It was like I wasn't even there. And then there was Claude, my father-in-law. Big voice. Even bigger ego. He moved through the crowd like he was the guest of honor. Every story, every laugh, had to pass through him first. He always had to be the loudest in the room, even when no one was laughing. Especially when no one was laughing. For years, I had been his favorite target, his little joke when he needed someone to point a finger at. Usually it was small things, calling me Sensible Sally when I wore flats, or asking if I'd finally learned how to season food. I'd learned to brace myself, smile, and let it pass. But this year, he took it to another level. He tapped a spoon on a glass, an actual cliché, and everyone turned toward the patio, where he'd set up a small screen and a microphone. My stomach tightened. My first thought, honest to God, was maybe he's planning something sweet. A tribute? A slideshow of memories? I was wrong. The first slide popped up. A photo of me in my old catering van, the one I had to sell after the business failed. And here's Sally, right before she made Charleston's driest chicken salad. Claude announced, his voice booming through the speakers. Laughter, light but present. Then another, me in high school. Braces, bangs, and a perm that didn't survive the humidity. Ah, Sally always ahead of her time. Unfortunately, the time never caught up. A few chuckles. Someone muttered, "Oh boy." I stood frozen. Then came a photo from last Christmas, unflattering and clearly snapped without my knowledge. "Not expecting guests, apparently," Claude barked. More laughter. And then he went there. A picture of a birthday cake digitally edited to read, "Congratulations on being the most average daughter-in-law." My name was scribbled under it like a joke signature. "Less cake for the non-grandma of the group," he added. That one hit me in the throat. The fact I hadn't had children, my choice, complicated and personal, was never something I offered up. But Claude, he just laid it out like it was part of the entertainment. No one stopped him. Not my husband, who leaned over and whispered, "It's just his humor, babe. Don't take it so hard." I didn't say a word. I didn't even blink. I waited until they clapped, until he bowed, until someone started serving pie like nothing had happened. Then I quietly slipped away. In the bathroom, I stood in front of the mirror. I didn't cry. My face felt tight, held together by something brittle. I looked myself dead in the eye and said, "This isn't going to happen again." I thought of all the years I'd swallowed that man's garbage. The jokes, the digs, the silences. I thought of how I'd made myself smaller just to keep peace. How many times I let myself believe I was overreacting. Sometimes the loudest screams are silent. My mother used to say that. She'd passed a decade ago, but in moments like this, her voice came through clear, steady, like a lifeline. As I turned to leave the bathroom, I paused. Out in the hallway, just above the entryway to the living room, was the small black bulb of Claude's security camera. I'd seen it before, never thought much of it. But today, it caught my eye. And an idea sparked. What if they could see what he really was? What if the world saw it? Not just me. No more being quiet. No more letting it slide. If no one was going to defend me, I'd become my own damn witness. The next morning, while the house still slept and Claude snored like a bear down the hall, I padded softly to the cabinet where he kept the system. I'd watched him fiddle with it enough times to know the basics. I slipped the USB stick into my pocket like it was a secret I was born to keep. The house had gone quiet, but my chest hadn't. I lay in the dark, my back to the wall, eyes fixed on the ceiling like they might tell me what to do next. The birthday decorations were still up, and the smell of burnt candle wax clung faintly in the hallway air. I'd brushed my teeth. I'd changed into a t-shirt. I'd even tucked the covers over me like I was going to sleep. But sleep wasn't coming. No one had said a word about what Claude did earlier. Not a whisper of apology. My husband barely met my eyes. He kept scrolling his phone, made some excuse about a headache, and went to bed early. And just like that, the night tried to move on, like my public shaming was just another side dish served cold. I sat up. Something still felt off. It wasn't just what happened in front of everyone. It was what hadn't happened after. The way Claude's wife wouldn't even look at me all evening. The way Trevor, my brother-in-law, clinked glasses too hard and kept avoiding sitting anywhere near me. There was tension. The kind that doesn't die when the party ends. I pulled a hoodie over my shoulders and stepped out of the room. The hallway was dim, the wood floor cool under my feet. I moved slowly, careful not to make the boards creak. Just as I turned the corner near the staircase, I caught a soft hum of voices downstairs. The kitchen light was still on. I paused. The voices were low, but clear enough. Claude's tone was unmistakable, smooth and smug. She always walks around like she's above everyone, just because she reads those thick books and doesn't talk much. Trevor snorted. Yeah, she acts like a damn judge at every dinner, like she's gonna write a Yelp review on the family. Claude let out a wheezing chuckle. If she knew what I did with the trust fund, she'd finally have something worth frowning about. That stopped me cold. Trevor replied. You serious? What if she finds out? Claude said, low and dry. She won't. Pride's a hell of a blindfold. They both laughed again. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Trust fund? What trust fund? There was never any mention of a fund, at least not to me. I remembered a Christmas Eve 3 years back. Claude handed me a manila envelope, said it was a routine estate update, needed a signature. I'd been juggling hot cider and a pie at the time, signed it without blinking. Now, I wondered what exactly I'd signed. I tiptoed back to the room, closed the door behind me softly, sat on the edge of the bed for a long minute. Then I reached into my purse and pulled out a notepad. It was old, used mostly for grocery lists and reminders to cancel subscriptions I never got around to. But tonight, it had a different purpose. I wrote, October, 11/11/42 p.m. Claude plus Trevor. Heard from kitchen, mocking tone, mention trust fund, hidden info. My hand trembled slightly, but my mind was calm, clear. I thought back over the last couple years. How conversations shut down the moment I walked in. How certain estate details were always handled already. The sudden tension when I asked about a family property that had mysteriously sold, I'd assumed it was my fault for asking. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe I was never supposed to ask. They think I'm clueless because I'm quiet. That sentence didn't feel like self-pity. It felt like a warning. I flipped on my laptop. The glow felt too bright in the room, like I was doing something illegal. But this wasn't about revenge. This was about finally seeing the full picture. I started with public records, looked up Claude's name, the family address, property transactions, anything tied to the last 5 years. Then I found the old email chain Claude had forwarded years ago. Attached to it was a PDF labeled Family Trust Update. I'd never opened it before. Inside, buried 3 pages deep, was language about redistribution of interest and voluntary relinquishment of claim rights. My name was listed, dated December 24. That was the Christmas Eve. I signed the envelope. I saved the file, downloaded a copy to an external drive I kept in my drawer. Then I searched for a number I hadn't dialed in years. Beth Myers, an old friend from college. We hadn't spoken much lately, but I knew she'd become an investigator for a state agency. She used to say, I dig where people don't want me to. Exactly what I needed. I scribbled her name down, followed by her number, and underlined it twice. I wasn't going to rush into anything. I'd collect information quietly. I'd move smart. I wasn't playing their game, I was learning their rules. I leaned back in my chair, exhaled. I'm not looking for revenge. I'm looking for clarity and a little justice. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was angry, but because I was finally awake. By morning, I had a name, a phone number, and a list of questions I was ready to ask. I avoided breakfast in the main dining room. The clinking of silverware and muffled conversation felt like a distant broadcast. Claude and Jared sat opposite each other across the table as though nothing had changed. I kept to myself, sipping weak tea, watching stale faces. How had we gotten to this place where even the morning acted normal after last night's spectacle? My husband's gaze flickered my direction once, then turned away. He was present, technically, but not with me. I slipped away to the sunroom, a quiet corner of the house rarely visited. The windows were dusty, the floorboards warped with time. It was the perfect hiding spot for forgotten relics. I found boxes stacked under a cloth sheet, old photo albums, letters, paperwork labeled estate. My heart thudded. This was where history lived, unguarded. I pulled a heavy album from the box. Dust puffed in the sunlight. On its spine was stamped 1982, 1990. I flipped slowly through the pages. First came images I recognized: Claude and his wife on vacation, children toddling in front of a lake, family picnics, the kind of photos meant to be cherished. But then one slipped loose and fluttered to the floor. Claude standing with a woman I had never seen before, arms around each other closely, their bodies inclined toward each other. Intimacy, not decorum. My pulse quickened. Turning the photo over, I read a scrawled caption: Marisol, Tahoe, Summer '86. Marisol. I swallowed hard. That name mentioned quietly once by Iris, while cleaning upstairs, had drifted through the house like a whisper. I had dismissed it then. I dismissed it now. I remembered the way Claude's face had tightened when I asked about a locked drawer last year. I recalled Iris muttering, Marisol's box, and Claude immediately shutting her down. I had thought it was housekeeping gossip, but this photograph made me rethink. The sandy shoreline behind them, the casual clothing, they looked like lovers in winter photos. My mind traced back flights Claude took, always business. The late-night calls he hid, the expense reports he claimed were frivolous. I thought of the evening he took that business trip and left me at home with excuses. I never questioned him then. I didn't dare. Now it all lined up. This wasn't a random affair. Marisol Denby had been part of his life for decades. And possibly still was. If those funds and that trust fund joke meant anything, this picture was a foundation stone. I snapped a picture with my phone in dim lighting, careful to angle so no glare would give me away. Then, with shaking fingers, I opened the shared family computer account they kept for documents. In a folder named T. Denby, I found email exchanges dated recently. Marisol Denby sent files, Claude replied cryptically. Financial agreements, transfers, references to continued support. My breath caught. This was buried but alive. This was active, not memory. I backed up the emails to my drive, then deleted traces so no one would notice my access. I tucked the photo under my shirt before walking back toward the hallway. I passed Claude's study door ajar and paused, listening for voices but heard nothing. The silence felt deliberate. In the foyer, light from early morning crept through the glass. I steadied myself, pressed both palms against the wall. Hypothesis forming. Marisol wasn't simply a ghost from Claude's past, she was a puppet master. She might have a stake in their finances, their secrets. Then the files, the name, the transfers, it all pointed to a deeper manipulation. I closed my eyes and whispered to myself, I see the architecture now. My posture shifted. I wasn't shrinking. I was constructing a path forward. I walked to my room, envelope in hand, thoughts racing. I would not wait for their avalanche. I would pull the trigger. I woke earlier than I needed to. The house still silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and a bird chirping outside the window. The weight in my chest from the night before hadn't lifted, it had settled deeper. I slipped out of the guest room and made my way back to the living room, unsure what I expected to find. What I found was the echo of a celebration that never belonged to me. Crumpled napkins, an empty wine glass tipped over on the edge of the side table, a balloon deflating in the corner like it finally gave up. I stepped over it and stopped in front of the fireplace, where a new family portrait had been framed and placed on the mantel overnight. I leaned closer. At first, I thought it was the lighting. But it wasn't. I was nearly cropped out, just a sliver of my shoulder, a hint of my dress. Everyone else was centered, smiling. I stood there, jaw tight, as Jared adjusted the lighting with Claude standing behind him, both speaking in low tones like I wasn't even there. And for a second, I believed them. Like I was the ghost in my own life. I approached the frame slowly. My hands weren't shaking, they were too cold for that. I studied it. My face was completely absent. There was a smudge near where I would have been. Fingerprint or intention? I couldn't tell. But what I did know was that I was being pushed out first in tone, now in image. I glanced around and spotted another frame, partly tucked behind the couch. I reached down and pulled it out, an older photo, dust along the edges. This one was from years ago, maybe 95 or so. And in that one, I was centered, smiling, holding Jared's hand. The difference was unmistakable. The past had included me. The present wanted to forget I'd ever been there. They're editing me out, I muttered to myself, voice flat. Even when they say it's family, I didn't need to scream. That was too easy. Instead, I found Jared and Claude, still by the mantel. I walked up to them, picture in hand. Why am I not in the new family photo? I asked. Calm, even. Claude didn't flinch. Artistic choice, he said, sipping his coffee like it was just another Tuesday. Jared avoided my eyes. The angle made the picture look better. I held up the older photo. This one didn't seem to need angles. Claude gave a half laugh, a forced one. That was a different time. Besides, it's not personal. But it was. It always was. My gut told me not to argue further. They'd spin it into defensiveness. Make me the emotional one. That's how people like Claude operate, undermine you with a smile, convince you you're imagining it. So I backed away. But not before saying, funny thing about family portraits, they reveal more than just faces. I left the room and texted Iris. Just a short line. Do you still have the original 1995 family portrait? Can you bring it to me quietly? Then I waited. In the silence of the hallway, I recalled something I read once. To erase a person is to try to silence their story. But I was done being quiet. I slipped into the study. The room smelled of cedar and old paper. I went to the back cabinet, where boxes were stacked 3 deep. One by one, I pulled them out, setting aside ledgers, estate documents, and dozens of unused frames. My hands moved faster with each layer I dug through. Then, at the bottom of the last crate, under a crumpled sheet of brown wrapping paper, I felt it wooden frame, cool to the touch. I lifted it out, and there we were, the original. Everyone in frame. Me, centered, smiling, like I belonged. And scrawled on the back, in Jared's handwriting, the 12th of August, 1995. That date, that night. I stared at it for a long moment. The night everything changed. When I stepped out from the storage room, I could still smell the dust from the boxes clinging to my sleeves. The dining hall, once loud with chatter, had grown quiet. Guests lingered near the doorway, whispering in low tones. The air felt heavy, almost staged, like everyone was waiting for a cue to leave. Claude's voice slipped through the noise, smooth but cutting. She's fixated on old pictures now, he said to someone behind him. I didn't turn around. He wanted me to react, but I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. I walked straight to the living room table and set the original family photo down next to the centerpiece. Not in defiance, not in shame, just where it belonged. The truth didn't need announcing. It only needed presence. I caught Jared's glance from across the room. He looked uneasy, his shoulders tight, his drink untouched. He knew what I'd done, and he knew it mattered. The crowd began to settle again, soft laughter replacing the tension, until Selena's voice pierced through it. All right, everyone, one last thing before dessert, she called. A staff member appeared with a gift box wrapped neatly in gold paper. A little token for our matriarch, Selena said, her tone rehearsed, eyes flicking toward Claude for approval. Applause followed. All show. I watched her unwrap the box with the same careful delight she used for every performance. Inside was an antique brooch, an emerald stone set in gold filigree, engraved faintly on the back. My breath caught. To Marisol. I recognized it instantly. My mother's brooch, the one I'd given Claude years ago to keep safe. The same tiny chip near the clasp. The same story he swore he'd forgotten. "That's a lovely piece," I said quietly. My voice cut through the murmurs. "Funny thing, though I left it in your study last Christmas." The clapping stopped. Selena froze mid-smile. Claude's hand twitched slightly around his glass. He didn't look at me right away. "You must be mistaken," he said evenly. "That belonged to my late wife." I took a step forward. "Then your wife must have had my mother's initials." He hesitated. His eyes dropped briefly to the engraving. The corner of his jaw tensed. Selena shifted uncomfortably, pretending to adjust her dress. Jared cleared his throat but stayed silent. Of course he did. It wasn't about the jewelry. It was about ownership, who got to keep what, and who got rewritten out of the family story. I could feel the old ache of betrayal turning into something sharper. Not tears, focus. Dinner stumbled on after that. No one said much. Even the clinking of forks seemed forced. When dessert came, the seating had been rearranged. The adults on one side of the room, the children gathered at a separate table near the fireplace. I noticed immediately that Silas, my son, had been seated with the little ones. He looked confused, scanning the room for me. I smiled at him, the kind of smile that said, "Hold on, it's okay." I leaned slightly toward him. "I'll support you even if they don't," I whispered across the distance. He nodded, but I could see the disappointment in his eyes. It wasn't the table that hurt him. It was the message behind it. "You don't belong here." And just like that, I realized they weren't just erasing me. They were beginning with him. The cycle repeating, quiet and polite. The cruelty dressed in etiquette. When the plates were cleared, I slipped out of the room. The hallway smelled faintly of cologne and brandy. Voices drifted from around the corner, Claude's low tone, Jared's softer one. "She's creating scenes again," Claude muttered. "She's upset, that's all," Jared said. "She's weak," Claude snapped back. "And weakness spreads if you don't contain it." I stepped forward. "Weakness?" Both turned sharply. Claude's expression didn't change, but Jared looked like he'd been caught stealing. "Why do you treat my gifts as liabilities?" I asked. Claude took a long breath. "Your sentimentality is a flaw, Sally. You give away things because you can't let go of the past." I tilted my head slightly. "Maybe I just don't confuse greed with legacy," he smirked. "That's why you'll never run this family." I smiled faintly. "Then I'll lead it a different way." For a moment, silence hung between us, like a line pulled tight. I could feel Jared's discomfort. He wanted to step in, but he wouldn't. Not against his father. "I want to see the security footage from this house," I said. My tone was calm, almost casual. "All of it." Claude frowned. "What are you implying?" "That truth hides best when no one's looking," I said. "I'm just tired of being blindfolded." He didn't respond, just stared. The kind of stare that tried to intimidate. It didn't work this time. I turned and walked away, my heels echoing on the tile. The corridor to the security room was long, dim, lined with framed family photos. I glanced at each one as I passed. In every picture, I was smaller, cropped closer to the edge. It was almost laughable how literal the pattern had become. Inside the security office, the hum of monitors filled the air. Rows of screens glowed blue. I sat at the console, scrolling through the footage. At first, it was nothing servants cleaning, guests moving through rooms. Then I saw a file marked guest record, 2 weeks ago. I clicked. The screen flickered. My living room came into view. Same couch, same rug, but it wasn't me sitting there. It was a woman mid-50s, calm, dressed sharply. She was talking to someone off camera. I recognized the voice immediately, Claude's. The woman turned slightly toward the lens. Her face was clear now. Marisol Denby, in my home, speaking to him, 2 weeks ago. The house was too quiet that night. The kind of quiet that doesn't calm you, it warns you. I sat on the edge of the bed, the light from my phone screen casting a thin glow across the sheets. I hadn't planned to check the family group chat again, but habit won. Every time things felt off in this house, that chat told the real story. I opened it, scrolling through the usual nonsense photos from dinner, compliments about the roast. Selena's fake laughter turned into text. Then a new message popped up, and my whole body went still. Claude. She's emotional, but manageable. Keep her in line before she gets ideas. It took a second to understand what I was seeing. Then my stomach twisted. The message hadn't gone to Jared or Selena, it had gone to everyone, including me. For a moment, the chat froze. I could picture them all realizing it at once. No one said a word. The message sat there, glowing like an exposed wire. Then, one by one, I watched as the others began deleting older texts, trying to erase their trail. Too late. I took a screenshot, my thumb shaking only once before the camera click. It was done. I had proof now, not just of what they thought of me, but how they operated. I scrolled up. Some of the earlier messages were gone, but fragments remained, little slivers of conversation that didn't delete fast enough. Words like trust fund, silent agreement, what she doesn't know, and then Jared's name appeared. Dad, you go too far sometimes. Claude's reply followed, short, confident. She doesn't understand power yet. That stopped me cold. Power. That was always the word he worshipped. This wasn't just control, it was his theology. Every kindness he offered came with a hook. Every rule disguised as protection. He didn't just humiliate me. He managed me, controlled the inheritance, dictated my son's future, used generosity as a leash. I set the phone down on the nightstand, the reflection of the screen flickering against the frame beside it, Silas's school photo. I picked it up, brushed my fingers over his face, his smile, his neat tie, the one he'd fussed over that morning. And then it hit me. Dinner last night, the seating chart. They'd placed him at the far end, at the kids' table, even though he was old enough to sit with the adults. He'd looked for me across the room, his eyes anxious but still searching for reassurance. I'd smiled at him then, pretending not to notice, pretending it didn't sting. Now I saw it clearly. It wasn't about manners or seating. It was separation. They wanted him away from me, just like they wanted me away from influence. They want to silence the only voice that trusts me, I whispered. I stood, set the photo back down carefully, and took one last look at the phone. My pulse steadied. For the first time in a long while, my fear didn't win. I reopened the group chat and began to type, slowly, deliberately. Missed messages aren't always mistakes. Some things are deliberately hidden. I hit send. Watched the message mark as read by each of them. No one replied. Then I opened a private chat with Jared, forwarded the screenshot of Claude's message, added only one line beneath it. This is your choice, stand with me, or with your father. No reply, just silence. But silence was still an answer. I left the phone on the bed, face up, and stepped into the hall. The light from the upstairs landing threw long shadows across the floor. Somewhere below, a door creaked, slow and deliberate. I didn't stop. The study was at the far end of the hallway. The door opened easily, as if it had been waiting for me. The smell of old cigars and dust hung in the air. Claude's desk was immaculate, nothing out of place, as always. His world was built on appearances. I crossed the room quietly, my shoes soundless on the carpet. I knelt by the cabinet that held the safe, small, dark, and discreetly built into the wall. My hand rested on the cold metal handle. He thought no. One else noticed the combination pattern. He was wrong. I turned to the portraits hanging above the mantel, his late wife, his sons, his legacy on full display. One frame, slightly crooked, drew my attention. I reached up, adjusted it, and felt something behind the backing. A slip of paper. I peeled it off carefully. 4 digits, written in his familiar script. I smiled to myself. Not from joy, from certainty. I knelt again, punched in the numbers. The lock gave a quiet click. The sound so small it almost vanished into the silence. I pulled on the handle, just enough to feel the mechanism release. That's when I heard it, the faintest creak of a floorboard behind me. I didn't turn right away. His reflection appeared in the glass cabinet beside the desk. Claude. He stood in the doorway, the dim light from the hall outlining his shoulders. His voice came low, steady, almost calm. I warned you what happens next. I met his eyes in the reflection and said nothing. Claude's shadow still lingered behind the door when I opened the safe. The latch gave under my hand, smooth and reluctant. Inside were stacks of papers, arranged like soldiers, every folder neatly marked, every secret catalogued. I pulled the top few out and read the labels. Denby, Trust, Undisclosed Agreements. The handwriting was his, cold, precise. My fingers trembled slightly as I flipped through the pages. Bank transfers, property deeds, correspondence between lawyers with signatures I didn't recognize. Each one pointed to something bigger, something he'd kept buried beneath the illusion of order. And then, half hidden under a stack of contracts, I saw it. A folder labeled Video Archive 1986 Present. The words sent a chill through me. I hesitated, staring at the edge of the manila paper as if it might bite. Behind me, the floor creaked. I froze, hand hovering midair. For a split second, I could feel breath behind me, but when I turned, the room was empty. The door had moved slightly, just enough to let the draft through. I took that as my only warning and pulled the folder open. Inside, a small hard drive was wrapped in cloth. Written across the top in Claude's distinctive scrawl, Home Archives, Backup. I plugged it into the small media player I kept hidden in my bag. A faint buzz, then a flash on the screen. The video started grainy, but the voices were unmistakable. Claude and Marisol. They sat at his desk, the same desk I was standing in front of. Younger versions of them, speaking softly. Claude's tone was calm, rehearsed. Marisol looked nervous. Claude said, "You'll get the support, but it ends there. She can't know." Marisol nodded slowly. "And the trust? It'll be secured?" He smiled. "As long as you stay quiet." The words burned through me. I leaned closer to the screen. The camera shifted slightly. Someone else had been recording, maybe without Claude knowing. Then, suddenly, the video froze. A screech of static filled the air. I tapped the device, hit play again. Nothing. Black screen. My heartbeat quickened. I rewound, then fast-forwarded. The footage flickered, stopped again. Half the files were unreadable, either damaged or wiped. He must have known someone might come looking. I scribbled the file names and timestamps onto a notepad I found on the desk. I'd find a way to recover them later. As I packed the player back into my bag, I caught movement in the doorway. "I wouldn't stay in that room too long," a voice said quietly. It was Iris, the maid. Her face looked older than I remembered, drawn and tired. She stepped into the dim light, eyes avoiding mine at first. "Iris," I whispered, "you shouldn't be here." She shook her head. "You think you're the first to look inside that safe?" The air seemed to thin around us. She walked closer, lowering her voice. "I saw them, Claude and Marisol. For years, he'd have me serve tea, then send me out. But I stayed close. I heard everything. They thought I was too old to care." I studied her face. It wasn't guilt, it was something else, a strange mix of fear and relief. "You helped him?" I asked. She nodded slowly. "At first, I moved the files when he asked. Deleted things. Sent messages under his name. Even those jokes in the group chat, his words, not mine." That admission stung, sharper than I expected. "Then why now?" I said. She sighed. "Because the lies have grown too heavy. He's crossed too many lines. I've been waiting for someone who could finish what I couldn't." From her apron, she pulled out a sealed envelope, its edges worn. "He told me to burn this if he ever fell ill. I never did. I think it was meant for you." I took it. The paper felt thick, old, like it had survived too many hands. "You never looked inside?" "I swore I wouldn't. But I know what's in it," she said softly. "Proof. Videos. Contracts. The kind of truth men like him can't erase." I stared at her for a long moment. Then I nodded. "You did the right thing." She gave a faint smile. "Don't thank me yet. He's awake. You don't have much time." We moved quickly through the corridor that connected the study to the side hall. Iris knew every creak in the floor, every door that stuck halfway. She led me like someone who'd done this 1,000 times, in silence. At the bottom of the stairs, I paused. "You've worked for him your whole life. Why help me?" She looked back, eyes steady. "Because I once believed him, and that's the worst mistake I ever made." She turned the corner, vanishing toward the kitchen. I slipped back into the main hallway, envelope clutched tight in my hand. In my room, I tore the seal open. Inside were 2 small USB drives and a stack of documents. Claude's signature was on every page, alongside Marisol's initials. There were bank statements, hidden asset transfers, agreements disguised as charitable donations. Every piece screamed one truth: the trust wasn't for family, it was for silence. I plugged one of the drives into my laptop. The screen lit up with new video files, most labeled by date. I opened one footage of Claude handing Marisol a sealed envelope, smiling that same rehearsed smile. The audio was muted, but I didn't need to hear it. The truth was visible in the gesture. Halfway through, the screen glitched again. This time the video simply cut off. I sat back, breath shallow. Someone had tried to destroy everything, but not well enough. I compressed the files into a folder and sent them to Jared. The message was short: "Look at what she's been hiding." Minutes later, my phone buzzed. One unread message from him: "What is this? Where did you get it?" I didn't answer. Some truths had to unravel on their own. From somewhere in the house, Claude's voice thundered through the hallway. "Who's been in my study?" Footsteps followed, heavy, quick, deliberate. I gathered the papers, slipped them into the envelope, and tucked it beneath my jacket. The weight felt different now, no longer fear, but power. As I stepped toward the staircase, I heard glass shatter behind me. The echo crawled through the house like a warning. When I reached the end of the hall, I turned. The study door was closing, slow and deliberate. Claude's silhouette filled the frame, his shadow long against the floorboards. He didn't speak. Neither did I. The envelope trembled slightly in my hand. I had everything I needed, just not the certainty of how this would end. The large dining room glowed with soft overhead lights and the low murmur of guests waiting. Plates were set but untouched. Some guests leaned forward, chatting quietly. Others sat rigid, watching the console at the front of the room. I walked slowly, heart pounding, toward the media console. The cables and remote were within reach. Claude sat at the head table, chest forward, a smug expression across his face. Jared beside me looked uneasy. I slipped my hand to his, offering silent support. The screen flickered. A soft cue played intro music humming across the speakers, and I steadied my breath. The first images on the screen were nostalgic. Birthdays, vacations, family dinners, laughter, framed in warmth. But then the footage shifted. It blurred into hushed conversations, sneaking glances, and private meetings. There she was, Marisol stepping into rooms no one ever supposed she belonged. The footage shifted again. Bank statements labeled support, signed documents with Claude's name, voice recordings muffled but clear in tone. The room fell quiet. Some gasped. Claude went pale. Then I heard my voice. "You told me it was for the house, not her." That shattered the illusion. The audience froze, their belief unraveling before them. Claude leapt toward the console, hand extended, trying to yank cables free. "Stop this!" he barked. Jared pushed forward to block him. But the system switched to backup immediately. The video continued. Claude shouted, "It's doctored! It's fake!" One guest, in shock, yelled across the room, "Do you expect us to believe all those documents and voices are fake too?" The mood snapped. Claude's command crumbled under the weight of witnessing his lies. On screen, financial records appeared, unmasked. Shell companies. Transfers to a spa registered under Marisol's name. Names from the trust files I'd found earlier matched. The hush in the crowd seemed to press people together. Whispers. "How long has this been going on?" I stood. I raised my voice. "I trusted so many of you. I shouldn't have." The camera panned to Claude, shock in his eyes, then to Jared, confused, and finally to me. In that moment, power shifted. Claude's throne of control cracked under the roar of truth. In the stunned silence, doors behind me clicked. People shifted in their seats. The screen glowed with the final file, cued one more truth waiting to be shown. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt earned, not empty, but peaceful. The air still smelled faintly of champagne and wax, and the faint hum of the refrigerator was the only sound left after the storm. Jared sat across from me at the kitchen table, shoulders slumped, eyes distant. Between us sat the remains of last night, a half-eaten cake, 2 glasses, and a silence too deep for small talk. He was the first to speak. "It's strange," he said slowly. "After everything we saw, After all that noise, it's just quiet now. I nodded. The quiet's honest. We just forgot what that felt like. He looked up at me, half smiling. I doubted you, you know. I thought you were chasing something impossible. But you had it all planned. It wasn't a plan, I said, tracing the rim of the glass. It was just truth waiting for a place to land. That's when I noticed the envelope on the counter. No name, no markings. I unfolded it, one line, written in sharp, steady handwriting. I knew what he was. Thank you for letting the rest of them see it. I sat there for a while, staring at it. Someone else knew, I said. Jared leaned forward. Then maybe you weren't alone in this, after all. I poured the last of the champagne, handed him a glass. To truth, I said. He smiled tiredly. And to whatever comes after it. We drank, the bubbles flat but satisfying. The night before had been chaos, but in that moment, everything inside me finally stopped trembling. By the next morning, the story had already taken on a life of its own. News spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. People whispered in grocery aisles, at coffee shops, outside church doors. Blogs picked up the footage. One local paper called it "The Night the Crowleys Fell." Marisol vanished first, her spa shut down, her phone disconnected. Claude didn't resurface either. No statement, no apology, not even denial. Just absence. I thought that would feel like victory. It didn't. It just felt quiet, the kind that comes after you've spent too long defending yourself to people who never listened. By afternoon, old names began showing up on my phone. Relatives, cousins, friends who'd gone silent when things got ugly. Most left long, awkward messages. Some offered sympathy. Others wanted to rewrite their part in the story. I didn't answer any of them. Then came one text, Jared's brother. I was wrong about you. I stared at it for a while, thumb hovering over the screen, then locked the phone. Forgiveness wasn't something I owed. Grace was mine to give, and I'd learned how to keep it close. Days later, I went back to therapy. The same small room with its familiar couch and too soft lighting. My therapist looked at me and smiled. You did it, she said. Did what? I asked. Stopped surviving. Started choosing. That hit me deeper than I expected. I talked about my father then, how he left without explanation, how every betrayal since had felt like a repeat of that wound. She listened quietly, then said, sometimes our greatest strength comes from breaking cycles, not enduring them. Those words lingered long after I left. That night, I started writing. Not a confession, not a retelling, just fragments of memory turned into something I could own. Jared found me at the table, pages scattered everywhere. You're writing again, he said softly. Yeah, I think it's time I tell the story on my own terms. A week later, he signed me up for a storytelling night at the community center. I wanted to say no, but he just smiled. You've got something people need to hear, he said. When the night came, I stood under the dim stage light, pages trembling in my hands. The crowd was small faces I didn't know, all waiting for something real. I didn't read what I'd written. I just spoke. My voice shook at first, then steadied as I went. I wasn't there to defend or accuse. I was there to remember and to move on. After I finished, a woman in the back stood up, eyes wet. You said what I never could, she whispered. That's when I knew my story wasn't just mine anymore. A few mornings later, I opened my email to find a message with no subject line, no sender name either. Just one sentence. Justice isn't just what you show, it's also what others choose to see. Attached was a video clip from the night of the party. I pressed play. It wasn't from my recording, it was filmed from a hidden angle, capturing everything. Claude's panic, the shifting faces of the guests, every whisper that turned into gasps. Someone else had been watching. Someone else had wanted the truth to survive. I sat there, frozen, then smiled. Claude's downfall wasn't my burden anymore. It was part of something larger, a web of accountability finally catching up with him. As the sun rose through the kitchen window, golden light fell across the floorboards. I poured a cup of coffee, the smell warm and grounding. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a woman defined by her pain. I looked out the window and whispered, "It's over." Then I smiled, not out of relief, but peace. My name is Sally. I said quietly to the empty room. And I remember everything not to hurt, but to heal.